My name is Lourdes, and at 67 years old, I never imagined I would end up sleeping on a cot in an unheated garage of the home I once owned. The family house I lovingly gifted to my daughter Julia became my prison when her husband Jack decided I was taking up too much space in their lives. The betrayal cut deeper than the winter chill that seeped through the concrete walls each night. But they underestimated this old widow. One phone call changed everything. Before I tell you how I reclaimed my dignity, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. And if this story resonates with you, please hit that subscribe button to join me on this journey of standing up for yourself even against family. That two-story colonial on Maple Street had been my home for over 40 years. My late husband Thomas and I purchased it back in 1979, stretching our budget to the absolute limit because we fell in love with the wraparound porch and the giant oak tree in the backyard. We were just 26, so young and full of dreams. The mortgage payments were steep, but Thomas always said, "This house will shelter our family for generations, Lou." He was a man who planned for the future. We brought Julia home to that house when she was just 2 days old. I can still picture Thomas carrying her tiny bundled form through the front door, whispering to her about all the memories she would make inside these walls. And she did. Her first steps were taken across the living room hardwood floors. I marked her height with pencil lines on the kitchen doorframe as she grew. The backyard witnessed countless birthday parties with streamers hanging from that mighty oak tree. The house evolved alongside our family. Thomas built the treehouse when Julia was 7. We converted the attic to a teenager retreat when she turned 14. The walls were repainted countless times to match Julia's changing tastes. Even the kitchen was remodeled twice the second time after Julia returned from culinary school with strong opinions about counter space and cabinet height. When Thomas passed away 5 years ago from a sudden heart attack, the house became both my comfort and my burden. Every corner held memories of our life together, some days bringing me peace, others bringing painful longing. Those first months of widowhood were a blur of grief and paperwork. Thomas had always handled our finances, and I found myself struggling to manage the property taxes, insurance, and maintenance costs on my teacher's pension. Julia was incredibly supportive during that difficult time. She would drive over every Sunday, sometimes staying the entire weekend. We would cook together in the kitchen Thomas had redesigned for her, sharing memories and tears. Those moments kept me going, when the emptiness threatened to swallow me whole. 2 years after Thomas passed, Julia brought Jack home to meet me. He was handsome and charismatic, a commercial real estate agent with an impressive sales record. I remember how he complimented the original crown molding in the dining room and asked thoughtful questions about the history of the house. He brought me flowers and insisted on fixing the leaky bathroom faucet that had been on my to-do list for months. "Your mother is incredible," he told Julia that night, loud enough for me to hear from the kitchen. "I see where you get your strength and class." I was charmed, I admit it. After 2 years of grief and loneliness, having a man around the house again, even just visiting, brought a warmth I had been missing. Jack would often stop by, even when Julia was working late at the restaurant where she was sous chef. He would bring coffee and sit with me on the porch asking about my teaching career, or listening to stories about Thomas. "He sounds like he was a wonderful man," Jack would say. "Julia is lucky to have had such a great example of what a husband should be." When they announced their engagement after dating for 2 years, I was genuinely happy. Jack had proven himself attentive and kind. Julia glowed in his presence. They seemed perfect together, and I looked forward to having grandchildren who might one day play under the same oak tree that had shaded their mother. The housing market in our area had become incredibly competitive. Julia and Jack spent nearly 8 months searching for a home they could afford. Each weekend, they would visit open houses, only to return discouraged by bidding wars and prices far above their budget. Even with Jack's real estate connections, they couldn't find anything suitable near enough to Julia's restaurant and my home. "We might have to look in the next county," Julia confessed one Sunday evening. "But I hate the thought of being so far from you, Mom." That conversation planted the seed in my mind. The house was too big for just me. The stairs were becoming more difficult for my aging knees. The yard work was overwhelming without Thomas. Meanwhile, my daughter and her fiancé were struggling to find a place to begin their life together. I spent several weeks consulting with my financial advisor, studying my retirement funds, and calculating what I would need for the next 20 to 30 years of my life. Thomas had left a decent life insurance policy, and my pension was stable. The house was fully paid off. The decision formed gradually, but once it crystallized, it felt absolutely right. Thomas would have wanted this. He had always said the house was for generations of our family. On Julia's 35th birthday, I handed her and Jack a small box. Inside was the deed to the house with transfer paperwork. "Mom, what is this?" Julia asked, her brow furrowing as she read the documents. "It's your wedding present," I explained. "The house is yours now. All I ask is that I can stay in the studio apartment we built over the garage when your grandmother lived with us." The studio was cozy and perfect for one person. Thomas and I had added it when my mother needed care in her final years. It had a small kitchenette, a full bathroom, and enough space for a comfortable living area and bedroom. The separate entrance meant I could maintain my independence while being close enough if Julia needed me. Julia burst into tears, clutching the papers to her chest. "Mom, we can't accept this. It's too much." Jack was momentarily speechless, his eyes wide with disbelief. Then he knelt beside my chair and took my hands in his. "Lords, this is the most generous gift anyone has ever given us. I promise we will honor this house and take care of it just as you and Thomas did." "And we'll always take care of you," Julia added fiercely. "This will always be your home, too." We spent that evening planning the transition. I would keep most of the furniture and family heirlooms in the main house for them to use. Jack suggested several improvements he wanted to make to update some of the older features. Julia promised the door would always be open between our spaces. The legal transfer included a life estate provision for the studio apartment, ensuring I would always have a place to live. My attorney suggested this protection, though at the time it seemed an unnecessary formality given the trust between us. I had such beautiful retirement dreams then. I would travel a bit, something Thomas and I had always planned to do after retirement but never got the chance. I would take up painting again. I would be nearby to help when Julia and Jack had children, but not intrusive. It seemed the perfect arrangement for everyone. Moving into the smaller space was liberating in many ways. I donated furniture I no longer needed and simplified my possessions. The studio overlooked the backyard and the oak tree, allowing me to still enjoy the view that had first made us fall in love with the property. I felt good about my decision. I was giving my daughter the stable foundation for her marriage that Thomas and I had enjoyed. If only I had known what that gift would cost me. Julia and Jack held their wedding reception in the backyard, under strings of lights hung from the branches of the oak tree. It was magical, though I noticed Jack had strong opinions about every detail, from the table arrangements to the playlist for the dancing. When Julia wanted to include some of the cultural traditions from Thomas's Puerto Rican heritage, Jack politely suggested they keep things classic and simple instead. I bit my tongue, not wanting to create tension on their special day. The first few weeks after they returned from their honeymoon seemed perfect. Jack was busy making improvements to the house, painting the living room a color he called modern greige, and replacing the vintage light fixtures with contemporary pendants. I complimented his taste, though privately I missed the warm yellows and character of the old fixtures. About a month after they settled in, I began noticing subtle changes in Jack's demeanor toward me. When I would come through the connecting door to bring over fresh baked banana bread or to borrow sugar, his smile seemed strained. Several times I caught him watching me with an expression I couldn't quite identify. "Your mother visits quite often," I overheard him say to Julia one evening, when they thought I had already left after joining them for dinner. "Mom is just being Mom," Julia replied lightly. "She brought us dinner, Jack." I know. It's just, I thought we would have more privacy as newlyweds." That was the first prick of unease I felt. I began to be more conscious of my visits, trying to text, before coming over, limiting my time in the main house. I wanted to respect their space as a newly married couple. Then came the furniture rearrangement. Without consulting me, Jack moved several family pieces to the basement, including Thomas's reading chair that had always sat in the corner of the living room. When I mentioned it, Jack explained that they were updating the aesthetic. "We're trying to make the space our own," he said, reasonably. "I hope you understand." Julia seemed torn. I could see her discomfort when Jack would make these changes, but she never contradicted him. "Marriage is about compromise, Mom," she told me privately. "And Jack has such good taste." I tried to maintain peace by finding new ways to connect with them. I offered to cook family meals twice a week, hoping food would bring us together as it always had. I spent hours in the garden maintaining the flowers and vegetables that Thomas and I had planted years ago. I made myself useful without being intrusive, or so I thought. That winter, an economic downturn affected my retirement portfolio. My financial advisor called with concerning news about some investments that had significantly decreased in value. It wasn't catastrophic, but it meant I needed to be more careful with my spending until the market recovered. I didn't share this worry with Julia and Jack immediately. I didn't want them to feel burdened by my financial concerns. But it did mean I spent more time at home rather than taking the small trips I had planned. Jack began to make comments about my constant presence around the property. When I would work in the garden outside their kitchen window, he would close the blinds. If I was reading on the porch swing when he came home from work, he would ask if everything was all right in the studio. "Just enjoying the porch," I would say. "Thomas and I always loved sitting out here in the evenings." "Well, it's our porch now," he replied, once his tone light, but his eyes cold. Julia and I were hoping for some privacy tonight. Our first Thanksgiving as a new living arrangement was tense. I had always hosted the holiday, preparing Thomas's mother's traditional recipes and setting the table with my grandmother's china. When I offered to do the same that year, Jack interjected before Julia could respond. "Actually, we thought we'd try something different this year," he said. "Julia and I want to start our own traditions. We're thinking of a more modern menu." I suggested a compromise where we could incorporate some new dishes alongside the traditional ones. Jack agreed, but on Thanksgiving Day, none of the family recipes made it to the table. Instead, there was a deconstructed turkey roulade and sides I didn't recognize. The family china remained in the cabinet. Julia seemed caught between us, her eyes darting anxiously between her husband and me throughout the meal. When I mentioned a funny Thanksgiving memory from her childhood, Jack smoothly changed the subject to their honeymoon adventures. Later that evening, I overheard them arguing in the kitchen as I was leaving to return to my studio. "Your mother is always bringing up the past." Jack's voice was low but intense. "Always reminding you of your father and your childhood here. Don't you see what she's doing? She's trying to keep her claim on this house and on you." "That's not fair," Julia protested weakly. "She's just sharing memories. Memories that make it clear this is still her house in her mind. We can't truly make this our home with her, watching our every move." I slipped away before they realized I had overheard my heart aching. That night, I cried for the first time since the moving day. Thomas would have known how to handle this situation. He had always been the diplomatic one, the peacemaker. I felt his absence acutely. The next morning, Julia came to the studio with coffee and an apologetic smile. "Jack's just adjusting," she said. "He never had a close family like ours. He doesn't understand our dynamics yet." I nodded, wanting to believe her explanation. "I'll try to give you both more space," I promised. But more space was never enough. Jack's criticisms of my intrusions became more frequent. When I collected mail from the shared mailbox, he accused me of being nosy about their correspondence. When I waved to them from my window as they left for work, he called it monitoring their movements. Julia stopped dropping by the studio spontaneously. When I invited her for our traditional mother-daughter Saturday morning coffee, she would check her phone, presumably texting Jack for permission. Sometimes, she would make excuses at the last minute, her eyes not quite meeting mine. Our relationship, once so close, began to feel strained and formal. The easy conversations we had shared all her life were replaced with careful small talk that avoided any topics related to the house, Jack, or the past. The first direct confrontation came 6 months after they moved in. I had noticed a leak in the gutter above my studio entrance and ventured into the main house to find the number for the repairman Thomas had always used. Jack found me looking through the desk drawer where we had kept home maintenance information. "What are you doing?" His voice was sharp enough to make me jump. "There's a leak in the gutter. I was looking for Mr. Sullivan's number. He's always handled our repairs." "Our repairs?" Jack repeated, emphasizing the first word. "You mean your repairs in your space? You should have asked me first before going through our desk." "I'm sorry, I didn't think." "That's the problem, Lourdes. You don't think about boundaries. You act like this is still your house to come and go as you please. Technically, I have a legal right to access." Jack's face hardened. "Is that what this is going to be, legal threats? Should I remind you that the main house is fully our property now? Your rights extend only to that studio, which we are generous enough to honor." I left without the repairman's number, shaking with a mixture of hurt and indignation. Later, Julia came to apologize for Jack's reaction, explaining he had been stressed about work. She promised to have the gutter fixed, but it remained leaking for another 2 weeks. That night, I pulled out the property transfer documents and reread the terms. The life estate provision guaranteed my right to occupy the studio, but it said nothing about access to the main house or grounds. In my trust and love, I had left those details unspecified, assuming good faith and family bonds would be sufficient. It was the first time I wondered if I had made a terrible mistake. The implementation of house rules began innocuously enough. Jack typed up what he called a shared space agreement and presented it during a dinner he had invited me to specifically for this purpose. The document outlined times when I was welcome in the main house, specified areas that were private zones for the couple, and established protocols for shared maintenance of the property. "This will help us all feel comfortable with boundaries," Jack explained, sliding the paper across the table to me. "Clear expectations mean no misunderstandings." Julia nodded encouragingly, though I noticed she wouldn't quite meet my eyes. "It's a good idea, Mom. This way everyone knows where they stand." The agreement restricted my access to the main house to between 10 in the morning and 7 in the evening, and only when invited or after texting ahead. The master bedroom, Jack's home office, and the formal dining room were designated off-limits entirely. I was allocated one shelf in the refrigerator for any items I needed to store that wouldn't fit in my studio kitchenette. I read through the document slowly, each line feeling like another brick in a wall being built between me and my daughter. This was the home where I had bandaged Julia's skinned knees, where we had baked Christmas cookies every December, where Thomas and I had slow danced in the kitchen on our anniversaries. Now I was being treated like an intrusive tenant. "Is this really necessary?" I asked quietly. "It's for the best," Jack assured me, his tone professional, as if closing a real estate deal. "This protects everyone's interests." Julia put her hand over mine. "Please, Mom. Jack feels it's important for establishing our marriage on solid ground." Wanting to support my daughter's marriage and avoid conflict, I signed the agreement. Jack immediately took the paper, made 2 copies on the printer in his office, and handed me one with a satisfied smile. "I knew you'd understand, Lourdes. You're always so reasonable." The rules expanded over the following weeks. Notes appeared on the laundry room door restricting use to Tuesdays and Thursdays between specific hours. The kitchen became off-limits during their dinner preparation time. Even the backyard was divided into zones, with the patio near the main house designated as Jack and Julia's private entertaining area. That winter, my arthritis flared up severely. The doctor prescribed new medication and recommended physical therapy twice weekly. The pain in my knees made the stairs to my studio challenging, and I found myself needing more rest than usual. Julia was concerned and offered to help with transportation to my appointments. Jack's irritation was palpable. "We're not running a nursing home here." I overheard him tell Julia one evening after she had brought me soup during a particularly painful flare-up. "If she needs that much care, maybe we should look into assisted living options." "She doesn't need that much care," Julia protested. "It's temporary. And she's my mother, Jack. And I'm your husband. Our life together has to come first." My friends began to notice the change in my living situation. Barbara, who had taught with me for 20 years, came to visit and was shocked when she had to text for permission to access the main house to use the bathroom. "Lou, what's going on here?" she asked when she returned to the studio. "Why do you need permission to enter your own home?" "It's not my home anymore," I explained weakly. "It's Julia and Jack's house now." Barbara frowned. Something doesn't feel right about this arrangement. When she tried to call me the following week, Jack answered my landline, explaining that calls were now routed through the main house for simplicity. He took a message, but never delivered it. I only learned about Barbara's call when she mentioned it during our book club meeting. The restrictions extended to visitors as well. Jack implemented what he called a property security protocol that required all guests to be approved 24 hours in advance. When my sister planned a surprise visit from Arizona, she was left waiting at the front gate for 30 minutes because Jack insisted the protocol had to be followed. My access to the kitchen in the main house became more limited. Jack complained about the smells from my Puerto Rican cooking, claiming they lingered in the curtains. The spices Thomas had loved, the recipes that connected Julia to her heritage, were now unwelcome. "We're trying to maintain a certain aesthetic and atmosphere," Jack explained when I questioned the new restrictions. "Some of those strong food smells don't fit with our home design concept." When Julia announced her pregnancy, 6 months after the wedding, I was overjoyed. A grandchild would bring new life and love to our family. I imagined sharing stories about Julia's childhood, passing down Thomas's wisdom, teaching family recipes. Jack, however, used the pregnancy as another reason to further restrict my involvement. "Julia needs complete calm and quiet during this time," he informed me. "The doctor is concerned about her blood pressure. Too much excitement or stress could be harmful to the baby." Julia did look tired and pale during her first trimester, so I didn't question this explanation initially. I reduced my visits to the main house even further, sending supportive texts instead and dropping off ginger tea for her morning sickness outside their door. Then came the day I returned from a doctor's appointment to find several boxes stacked neatly outside my studio door. Inside were photo albums, Thomas's books, and personal mementos that had been stored in the basement of the main house. "We need the space for the nursery storage," Jack explained when I asked about the sudden move. "Julia wants to convert part of the basement into a proper playroom eventually." I tried to discuss the situation with Julia directly the next day, catching her alone when Jack left for work. "Sweetheart, I feel like I'm being pushed further and further away," I admitted. "Was I too intrusive? Have I done something wrong?" Julia burst into tears, her pregnancy hormones amplifying her emotions. "It's not you, Mom. Jack just has very specific ideas about our space and privacy. He says all couples need to establish boundaries with extended family. But we've always been close, and this was our family home for decades." I know. But it's our house now, and Jack he feels like your presence sometimes overshadows our ownership. Like we're living in Lourdes' house instead of our own home. "I gave you this house because I love you," I reminded her gently. "Because I wanted to support your marriage and future family." "And we appreciate that so much," Julia said, wiping her eyes. "Jack says we just need time to make it truly ours. Once the baby comes and we find our footing as parents, things will ease up. I promise." I wanted to believe her, but Jack's behavior had established a clear pattern of increasing isolation. Each concession I made led to new restrictions. Each boundary I respected was soon pushed further. The physical and emotional toll began to show. I lost weight, my arthritis worsened, and anxiety kept me awake at night. I found myself tiptoeing around my own studio, worried that any noise might provoke complaints. I stopped inviting friends over to avoid conflict about the visitor protocol. My world was shrinking along with my connection to my only child. Thanksgiving had always been the most important holiday in our home. Thomas had loved the gathering of family and friends, the traditional dishes passed down through generations, the sharing of gratitude around a crowded table. Even after his passing, I had maintained these traditions, finding comfort in the familiar rituals. As November approached in my second year of the new living arrangement, I longed for some semblance of normal family connection. Julia was now 6 months pregnant, her belly, a perfect round promise of new life. Despite the growing tensions, I hoped the holiday might offer a chance to rebuild some of our former closeness. I was thinking about Thanksgiving, I ventured during a rare moment alone with Julia. Maybe we could prepare some of the traditional dishes together. Your father always loved my mofongo and pernil. Julia brightened momentarily. That sounds nice. Let me talk to Jack. 2 days later, she informed me that Jack had already ordered a catered Thanksgiving meal from an upscale restaurant. It's easier with my pregnancy fatigue, she explained apologetically. What about guests? I asked. I usually invite my sister Angela. She's flying in from Arizona. Julia's expression became anxious. Jack wants to keep it small this year. Just the three of us. He says big gatherings are too stressful for me right now. I felt a surge of frustration. Julia, I've barely seen Angela since your father's funeral. She's looking forward to seeing the house again and hearing about the baby. I know, but Jack thinks. What about what you think I interrupted, surprising us both with my directness? This was your family tradition too. A flash of the old Julia appeared, a glimpse of the independent woman she had been before Jack. You're right. Invite Aunt Angela. I'll handle Jack. The day before Thanksgiving, Angela arrived at the house. I had warned her about the changes, but she was still shocked by the formal way Jack greeted her and the guided tour that carefully avoided certain rooms of the house. This is worse than you described on the phone, she whispered, when we finally had a moment alone in my studio. He treats you like an unwelcome guest. It's complicated, I said, not wanting to put my sister in an uncomfortable position. Let's just try to have a nice holiday. Thanksgiving Day started tense and deteriorated quickly. The catered meal arrived in elegant packaging, nothing like the home-cooked feast that had always filled the house with delicious aromas. When Angela innocently asked about the traditional dishes, Jack launched into an explanation about elevating their holiday experience. We're creating new traditions now, he said pointedly. More sophisticated ones. Angela, never one to back down, smiled sweetly. In my experience, traditions tie families together. Lou and Thomas created such beautiful ones for Julia. Jack's jaw tightened. Yes, well, sometimes old traditions need to be replaced when they no longer serve the current family unit. The conversation grew increasingly strained as the meal progressed. When Angela mentioned Thomas's name for the third time, sharing a funny story about his disastrous attempt to deep-fry a turkey one year, Jack abruptly stood up. I think we need to be clear about something, he announced, looking directly at me. This constant reminiscing about the past and about Thomas is not healthy for our current family dynamic. Julia and I are trying to establish our own household, our own memories, and it's difficult when Lourdes continually drags everything back to how things used to be. The table fell silent. Julia stared at her plate, one hand protectively covering her pregnant belly. Jack, she said quietly, that's enough. But he wasn't finished. No, it needs to be said. Your mother gave us this house, but she can't seem to actually let it go. She hovers, she intrudes. She tries to maintain control through emotional manipulation about your father and the past. Angela gasped. How dare you speak to my sister that way? This is my house, Jack said coldly, and I'll speak however I choose in it. Julia finally looked up, tears streaming down her face. Stop it, both of you. This is horrible. Jack turned to her, his expression immediately softening. I'm sorry, sweetheart. This stress isn't good for the baby. This is exactly why I wanted a quiet holiday, just us. He shot an accusatory glare at me. You see what you've caused. Her blood pressure is probably through the roof now. Don't blame me, sister, for your atrocious behavior, Angela snapped. Jack's voice became dangerously calm. Julia, I think it's time for your mother and aunt to leave. You need to rest. I looked at my daughter, silently pleading for her to stand up to this bullying. For a moment, I thought she might. Then she placed her other hand over Jack's. Mom, Aunt Angela, maybe it would be best if we continued this another time. I am feeling a little overwhelmed. Angela started to protest, but I touched her arm gently. It's okay. Let's go. We retreated to my studio where Angela paced furiously, suggesting everything from legal action to calling Julia's friends to intervene. I felt numb the final thread of hope that my daughter would choose me, would remember our bond had snapped. The next morning, Angela left for her hotel, promising to return later. I ventured out to retrieve my mail still shaken from the previous day's confrontation. What I found changed everything. My remaining belongings from the main house storage areas had been moved to the detached garage. Boxes of winter clothes, books, and the last of my keepsakes were stacked haphazardly next to garden equipment and old paint cans. A folding cot had been set up in one corner with a small space heater beside it. Jack emerged from the side door as I stood staring at the makeshift living space. "We need to make some changes," he announced without preamble. "Julia's doctor is concerned about her stress levels. Having you so close during this vulnerable time isn't working." "What are you talking about?" I asked, genuinely confused. "My studio is separate from your living space." "Not separate enough. The doctor suggests complete stress reduction. We've decided the garage would be a more appropriate arrangement until after the baby is born and things stabilize." I looked around at the unfinished space. The garage had never been properly insulated. The concrete floor was cold and damp. There was minimal plumbing, just a utility sink and a half bathroom Thomas had installed for convenience when gardening. "This is uninhabitable," I said, "especially in winter." Jack shrugged. "We've provided a heater. The bathroom is functional. It's temporary just until Julia's delivery and recovery period is complete." "That's months away." "And where is Julia? Does she know about this?" "Of course she knows. This was a joint decision for the health of our child." I didn't believe him, but when Julia finally answered my calls later that day, her response devastated me. "Mom, please just cooperate for now," she said, her voice small and tired. "Jack says the doctor is really worried about my blood pressure. After the baby comes, we can revisit everything. Julia, the garage isn't a proper living space. It gets below freezing in there." Jack installed the heater, and he's going to add some insulation this weekend. "Please, Mom. I can't handle any more conflict right now." By evening, with Angela's reluctant help, I had moved my essential belongings to the garage. The space was as grim as I had feared. The heater barely took the edge off the cold. The bathroom had no shower, just the toilet and small sink. A printed schedule on the door indicated I was permitted to use the main house bathroom for showering between 8 and 9 in the morning only. That night, lying on the narrow cot under 3 blankets, I cried for the first time since Thomas died. Not quiet tears, but deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from the very core of my being. I cried for Thomas, for the daughter who seemed lost to me, for the grandchild who might never know me, and for my own foolishness in giving away the one thing that had given me security. The conditions in the garage quickly proved dangerous to my health. December brought freezing temperatures, and the small heater couldn't combat the cold that seeped through the concrete floor and thin walls. My arthritis pain became nearly unbearable. A persistent cough developed from the dampness and exposure. Jack limited my bathroom access in the main house, even further claiming my early morning shower disturbed their sleep. When I requested access to do laundry, he suggested I use a laundromat instead, as the sound of the machines was stressful for Julia. My attempts to speak directly with my daughter were consistently blocked. Jack answered her phone, monitored her emails, and was always present on the rare occasions I was permitted to see her. Julia looked increasingly pale and withdrawn during these brief interactions, her pregnancy progressing while our relationship deteriorated. One particularly cold night in mid-December, as temperatures dropped to 20 degrees, the garage heater failed completely. I huddled under every blanket I owned, unable to sleep, my joints screaming in pain, and my cough growing worse by the hour. In that dark, frozen moment, something broke and reformed within me. The fog of confusion hurt, and self-doubt cleared, replaced by a crystal clarity. This was not about Julia's pregnancy stress or my behavior. This was about power and control. Jack had systematically isolated my daughter, turned her against me, and was now putting my health and possibly my life at risk. This was elder abuse, plain and simple. Thomas would never have allowed this to happen. He would have fought with every resource at his disposal to protect our family. And now it was my turn to fight. The next morning, shivering and exhausted from my sleepless night, I made a crucial decision. Instead of trying to fix the heater or beg Jack for mercy, I would take action. Thomas had always told me, "Lou, when you're backed into a corner, don't look at the walls, look for the door." It was time to find that door. I made my way to the local library when it opened, seeking warmth as much as information. There I used the public computers to research my rights. The terms elder abuse, financial exploitation, and undue influence appeared repeatedly in my searches, each description matching aspects of my situation with disturbing accuracy. As I was printing some information, my phone rang. It was Barbara, my old teaching colleague and friend who had noticed the changes months earlier. "Lou, I've been trying to reach you for weeks," she said. "Your number goes straight to voicemail and no one answers the house phone." I explained my current situation, my voice breaking despite my attempts to remain composed. "This is outrageous," Barbara declared. "Where are you right now? I'm coming to get you." 2 hours later, I was sitting in Barbara's warm kitchen, a mug of hot tea between my hands as I shared the full story of the past 18 months. The gradual isolation, the increasing restrictions, and finally, the banishment to the unheated garage. I should have seen this coming, I concluded. All the signs were there. Barbara reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Lou, this isn't your fault. What Jack is doing is calculated and deliberate, and unfortunately it's not the first time he's done this." I looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" Barbara hesitated, then sighed. "I didn't want to say anything before because it seemed like hearsay, but my niece worked with Jack's previous girlfriend, Melissa. Apparently Melissa had a similar situation with her mother moving in with them. Jack gradually turned Melissa against her mother until the poor woman moved out and practically disowned her daughter. The patterns are identical." This revelation struck me like a physical blow. Jack's behavior wasn't just controlling, it was a calculated pattern he had executed before. Somehow this knowledge strengthened my resolve. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about protecting Julia from a man who systematically isolated women from their support systems. "What should I do?" I asked. "First, you're staying here until we sort this out," Barbara said firmly. "Second, we need to find those property documents. And third, we're getting you legal help." The next day, after a night in a proper bed that eased my arthritis pain considerably, I remembered something crucial. Thomas had always kept duplicate copies of important documents in his old briefcase, which I had moved to the studio and later to the garage. Searching through the boxes Jack had so unceremoniously relocated, I found the briefcase tucked beneath winter sweaters. Inside was a complete copy of the property transfer agreement, including amendments and stipulations that I had forgotten in my grief and confusion following Thomas's death. The life estate provision was more comprehensive than I had remembered, specifying suitable accommodation with proper heating, plumbing, and access. The garage clearly violated these terms. More importantly, there was a reversion clause that Thomas had insisted upon. If the terms of my life estate were violated for more than 30 days, I had the option to revoke the gift and reclaim ownership of the entire property with reasonable compensation for any improvements made. Armed with these documents, Barbara drove me to the local senior services center, where we met with an advocate named Michael. After reviewing my situation, he connected me with attorney Sarah Williams, who specialized in elder law and property rights. Sarah's office was warm and inviting, her manner professional but compassionate. She reviewed the documents carefully, taking detailed notes. "Mrs. Ramirez, what's happening to you is not just morally wrong, it's legally actionable," she said finally. "The life estate provision is being flagrantly violated, and we have clear evidence of elder abuse through inappropriate housing isolation and psychological manipulation." "What can we do?" I asked, hope beginning to flicker within me for the first time in months. "First, we document everything Sarah explained. Take photos of the garage conditions. Get medical records showing how your health has declined. Save any text messages or emails related to the restrictions Jack has imposed. She outlined a strategic approach beginning with a formal letter, asserting my rights under the property agreement and escalating to legal action if necessary. But the most powerful tool we have, she added, is the reversion clause. That's our nuclear option. I don't want to make Julia homeless, I said quickly. Especially not while she's pregnant. Sarah nodded understanding. The goal isn't to punish your daughter, but to establish boundaries with her husband and ensure your rights are respected. Often just having legal representation changes the power dynamic significantly. As I left her office, I felt a weight lifting. The path forward wouldn't be easy, but I was no longer alone in the dark, freezing garage with no options. I had allies, information, and most importantly, I had rights that Jack couldn't simply dismiss. That evening, the most critical moment arrived as I made the pivotal phone call to a residential locksmith. With Barbara and Sarah present for support, I explained my situation and legal standing. I need to regain access to my legal residence, I explained, providing the documentation Sarah had prepared. I've been illegally excluded from my rightful living space. The locksmith, after consulting with his company's legal department, agreed to meet us at the property the following morning. Sarah assured me that, with the documentation we had, this was not breaking and entering but reclaiming rightful access. While we waited, I continued gathering evidence. Barbara helped me photograph the garage conditions, including temperature readings that showed how dangerously cold it became at night. My doctor documented my worsening arthritis and respiratory infection, directly attributing both to improper living conditions. I also uncovered financial records, showing that Jack had refinanced the house shortly after the transfer, taking out a substantial equity loan that Julia might not even be aware of. This discovery added another layer of concern about his intentions. With each piece of evidence, with each supportive action from my friends and legal team, my confidence grew. I wasn't just fighting for my rights now. I was fighting for my daughter's future and for the grandchild who deserved to know their grandmother. Thomas had always told me I was stronger than I knew. Looking at the comprehensive file of evidence we had compiled, at the clear legal strategy taking shape, I finally believed him. The woman who had meekly accepted banishment to a freezing garage was gone. In her place stood someone who would no longer be victimized, no matter how much she loved her daughter. The night before our planned action, I slept peacefully for the first time in months. Tomorrow would change everything, one way or another. I was ready. The morning arrived crisp and clear, a perfect winter day that matched my newfound clarity of purpose. Barbara picked me up early, and we met Sarah at her office to review our strategy one final time. Remember, Sarah advised, our goal today is to have a direct conversation with Julia without Jack's interference. The locksmith and property access are leverage, not the end goal. Our timing was strategic. Jack typically left for work by 8:30, and we arrived at the property at 9:15. The locksmith's van was already waiting discreetly down the street, ready to approach when signaled. I felt a flutter of anxiety as we pulled into the driveway, memories of humiliation and rejection threatening my resolve. Barbara squeezed my hand encouragingly. "You've got this, Lou." To our surprise, Julia answered the door herself, her eyes widening at the sight of me standing between Barbara and Sarah. Her hand instinctively went to her pregnant belly, now prominently rounded at 7 months. "Mom, what's going on? Who are these people?" "We need to talk, Julia," I said, firmly but gently. "Alone. It's important." Julia glanced nervously over her shoulder. "Jack works from home on Wednesdays now. He's in his office." Sarah stepped forward, presenting her business card. "I'm Sarah Williams, your mother's attorney. We have legal documentation requiring a private conversation with you regarding the property agreement and your mother's living conditions." Julia's face paled. "Attorney Mom, what have you done?" "What I had to do," I replied. "Please, sweetheart. 15 minutes. That's all I'm asking." After a moment's hesitation, Julia nodded and stepped outside, closing the door behind her. We settled in Barbara's car for privacy, Julia's movements awkward with her advanced pregnancy. "Julia," I began, "there's something you need to know about Jack. This isn't the first time he's isolated a woman from her mother." I explained what Barbara had learned about Jack's previous relationship pattern with Melissa and her mother. Julia listened silently, her expression shifting from defensive to confused. That doesn't mean he's doing the same thing now, she said finally, but her voice lacked conviction. Sweetheart, look at what's happened. I've been moved from my legal residence to an unheated garage in winter. My health is suffering. I've been cut off from communicating with you. These are documented forms of elder abuse. Sarah gently showed Julia photographs of the garage conditions, the temperature readings, and my medical reports. She explained the terms of the life estate provision that Jack had violated. Did you know about these conditions? Sarah asked. Did you agree to have your mother living without proper heat or bathroom facilities? Julia's eyes filled with tears. Jack said it was temporary. He said you agreed to it while we prepared the nursery. He told me you were fine, that you understood. And did you ever check yourself? I asked softly. Did you ever come to the garage to see how I was living? The tears spilled over. He said, you needed space, that your constant presence was raising my blood pressure and endangering the baby. He showed me articles about pregnancy stress. My doctor did say my blood pressure was elevated, but... She trailed off, realization dawning. I never asked my doctor if you were the cause. Has Jack been monitoring your phone? Your emails, controlling who you can see and when? Julia nodded slowly. For the baby's health, he said. To protect our family unit. I reached for her hand. That's not protection, Julia. That's control. What happens now? She asked, her voice small. Sarah explained our legal options, including the reversion clause that could potentially return ownership of the house to me. Julia's eyes widened in alarm. I don't want to take your home, I assured her quickly. I want us to find a solution that respects everyone's rights and needs. But I cannot and will not continue living in dangerous conditions cut off from my only child. We've prepared a formal notice of violation, Sarah added, which we're prepared to serve today. It gives Jack 30 days to restore proper living conditions according to the original agreement. If he refuses, we have legal grounds to proceed with property reversion. Julia sat silently for several minutes, absently stroking her belly as she processed everything. Finally, she looked up, her eyes clearer than I had seen them in months. I want to see the garage, she said. Show me where you've been living. We walked together to the detached structure. When Julia saw the cot, the inadequate heater, the makeshift arrangements for basic living, she gasped. Mom, I had no idea. He told me he had fixed it up properly for you, that it was comfortable and well heated. She touched the concrete wall, feeling the cold seeping through. This is inhumane. I would never have agreed to this. Her face hardened with a resolve. I recognized the expression she had inherited from Thomas. We're fixing this today. You're coming back to the studio immediately. Jack's reaction was predictable and explosive. When he discovered Julia helping me move my belongings back to the studio, he appeared in the doorway, his face contorted with rage. What the hell is going on here? He demanded. Julia, what are you doing? The right thing, she answered, continuing to arrange my clothes in the dresser. Mom is moving back where she belongs. We discussed this, Jack said, his voice dangerously controlled. Your health and the baby's health are not affected by my mother living in her legal residence, Julia interrupted. I've seen the garage, Jack. How could you put her there, in winter? You agreed to it, he snapped. Don't act innocent now. I agreed to what you told me, not what was actually happening. Jack's attention shifted to me, then to Sarah, who stood quietly observing. Who are you? Sarah handed him her card and the formal notice. I represent Mrs. Ramirez in this matter. This document outlines the violations of the life estate provision and the consequences if they're not rectified immediately. Jack scanned the document, his expression darkening. This is ridiculous. We own this house. We can determine who lives where on our property. Actually, you can't, Sarah corrected calmly. The terms of the property transfer are quite specific about Mrs. Ramirez's rights. Furthermore, we have documented evidence of elder abuse through inappropriate housing, which is both a civil and potentially criminal matter. Jack turned to Julia, his strategy shifting. Sweetheart, this stress isn't good for the baby. Your mother is causing problems again, just like I warned you. Do you want to risk our child's health? For a moment, Julia wavered, her hand going protectively to her belly. I held my breath, fearing she would succumb to his manipulation again. Then she straightened, meeting his gaze directly. Don't use our baby to manipulate me, Jack. What risks our child's health is having a father who would treat an elderly woman, his own grandmother, with such cruelty. If you side with her, Jack threatened, you're choosing her over our marriage, over our family. No, Julia said quietly. You're the one forcing that choice. And if that's your position, then maybe we need to reconsider more than just Mom's living arrangements. The confrontation continued to escalate. Jack stormed out, returning an hour later with his own attorney who attempted to intimidate us with legal jargon and threats. Sarah calmly countered each point, presenting our documentation and citing relevant elder protection statutes. When Jack realized the legal approach wasn't working, he resorted to more direct intimidation. That evening, he shut off power to the studio, claiming electrical concerns required rewiring. We were prepared. Barbara had brought battery-powered lanterns, and Sarah immediately documented the retaliation. The next morning, a housing inspector arrived at our request to assess the property, finding multiple code violations in both the garage conversion and the improper utility disconnection. The community began to rally around us. My former students, now adults with their own families, organized meal deliveries. Church members stopped by with offers of support. Neighbors who had witnessed Jack's controlling behavior over the months came forward with their observations. Julia, seeing the outpouring of community support, found her own strength growing. While Jack was at work, she searched his office and discovered financial documents showing he had not only taken an equity loan against the house without fully informing her, but had also been monitoring her personal bank account and redirecting funds to accounts she couldn't access. He said he was managing our finances for the baby's future, she told me, her voice shaking with anger. But he's been controlling every dollar, giving me an allowance from my own chef's salary. The final straw came when a local reporter, alerted to the situation by a concerned community member, expressed interest in covering the story. Elder evicted to garage by son-in-law after gifting family home was not the kind of publicity Jack's real estate career could withstand. Cornered legally, financially, and now publicly, Jack made one last desperate attempt to maintain control. He packed a bag for Julia, insisting they stay at a hotel until this blows over. Standing in the doorway of the home she had grown up in, Julia finally made her definitive choice. I'm not going anywhere, she told him firmly. This is my family home, and I'm staying here with my mother. Then you've chosen her over me, Jack said coldly. Don't expect me to forgive that. I don't expect or need your forgiveness, Julia replied. What I needed was a husband who would honor family and treat others with basic human dignity. You failed at that, Jack, not me. That night, with Jack temporarily moved to a hotel and a temporary restraining order in place, preventing him from interfering with my residence, Julia and I sat together in the kitchen, where we had shared so many meals over the decades. I'm so sorry, Mom, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. I let him isolate me, control me, turn me against you. How could I have been so blind? I held my daughter's hand across the table the same way Thomas had held mine through difficult times. Love can be blinding, I said gently. And manipulation happens gradually. You're seeing clearly now. That's what matters. We had won the battle, but the war for Julia's freedom and our family's healing was just beginning. The court hearing regarding my living situation was scheduled for early January. As we prepared, more disturbing information about Jack's past emerged. Sarah's investigator discovered he had a pattern of targeting women with valuable property or assets, particularly those with close maternal relationships he could disrupt. It's a control tactic, Sarah explained. Isolate the wife from her support system, particularly her mother, then gradually take control of assets and decision-making. The judge assigned to our case, a stern woman in her 60s, reviewed our documentation thoroughly. When Jack's attorney attempted to paint me as an intrusive mother-in-law who couldn't let go of the past, she cut him off sharply. The photographs of the garage living conditions alone constitute elder abuse, she stated firmly. The temperature readings and medical reports only strengthen that conclusion. Her ruling was unequivocal. I had the legal right to occupy the studio apartment as originally agreed, with full access to utilities and appropriate accommodations. Furthermore, she granted a 6-month restraining order against Jack to prevent any retaliation or harassment. Should there be any further violations of Mrs. Ramirez's life estate rights, she warned, this court will consider activating the reversion clause, returning full ownership to her with appropriate compensation for improvements only. Jack's fury was barely contained as he left the courtroom. His control over the situation, over Julia, over the valuable property was slipping away, and he knew it. That evening, he attempted to force Julia to agree to sell the house and split the proceeds. "We'll buy something smaller just for us and the baby," he pressured. "Somewhere your mother can't interfere." But Julia had found her strength again. With the clarity that comes from seeing manipulation exposed, she recognized the pattern of control that had nearly destroyed our family. "This house isn't for sale," she informed him. "And neither am I." When she discovered Jack had been intercepting her mail, including important correspondence from her restaurant, about a potential promotion to executive chef, Julia made her final decision. With support from Sarah and a family law attorney, she filed for separation, citing emotional abuse and financial control. The process wasn't easy. Jack fought every step, using the pregnancy and impending birth as leverage, claiming Julia was hormonal and making irrational decisions. He attempted to turn friends against her, spread rumors about my mental stability, and even tried to challenge the original property transfer as made under duress. None of it worked. The legal documentation was solid, the evidence of his behavior compelling, and most importantly, Julia had awakened to the reality of her marriage. When their son Thomas, named for his grandfather, was born in February, Jack was not present. He had chosen to attend a real estate conference, instead his final passive-aggressive statement about his priorities. Holding my grandson for the first time, I felt an overwhelming sense of both joy and responsibility. This tiny new life represented our family's future, a future that needed to be built on honesty, respect, and genuine love, not control and manipulation. Julia filed for divorce when Thomas was 6 weeks old. Jack, realizing he had lost his grip on both the property and his wife, finally agreed to a settlement. He would relinquish any claim to the house in exchange for a modest financial payment that reflected only his actual contributions to property improvements. "It's worth every penny to be free of him," Julia said as we finalized the agreement. "I can't believe I almost lost you, almost lost myself because of his manipulation." Our healing as mother and daughter didn't happen overnight. Trust had been damaged on both sides. Julia felt shame for having believed Jack's lies about me, while I struggled with the pain of her having chosen him during those critical moments. We began seeing a family therapist together, working through the complex emotions of betrayal, forgiveness, and rebuilding. The physical healing came more quickly. Once back in the proper studio apartment with adequate heating and facilities, my arthritis improved significantly. The respiratory issues cleared up, and I regained the weight I had lost during those harsh garage months. As spring arrived, bringing new life to the garden Thomas had loved so much, Julia and I planted a new oak sapling beside the original mighty tree. "For little Thomas," she explained, "so he can watch it grow as he grows, just like I did with the big one." I joined an elder rights advocacy group, sharing my story to help others recognize the warning signs of isolation and abuse. To my surprise, several women came forward with similar experiences involving Jack or men like him. Together, we created a support network and resource guide for seniors in vulnerable housing situations. Julia returned to work part-time when Thomas was 4 months old. Her restaurant created a flexible schedule that allowed her to balance her culinary career with motherhood. I cared for my grandson during her shifts, the joy of this new role healing old wounds. We established new boundaries in our relationship, healthier ones based on mutual respect rather than control. The studio gave me independence while the connecting door remained unlocked. A symbol of our open communication, Julia made decisions about her life and her son's upbringing, consulting me when she wanted advice, but not obligation. On warm evenings, we would sit on the porch, swing baby Thomas sleeping peacefully between us, and sometimes talk about the difficult times we had survived. I've learned that generosity should never come at the cost of your dignity, I told her one such evening. Thomas, your father always said that family supports each other but never owns each other. I've learned that love doesn't make demands or isolate you from others who love you, Julia added. Real love expands your world, it doesn't shrink it. The most profound lesson for me was learning that standing up for myself didn't mean losing my daughter. In fact, my willingness to fight for my rights ultimately helped free her from a controlling relationship. By valuing myself enough to make that one pivotal phone call, I had created the possibility for both of us to reclaim our power and rebuild our bond. Today, our arrangement isn't perfect, but it's healthy. The house that Thomas and I purchased so many years ago continues to shelter generations of our family just as he had envisioned. My grandson is taking his first steps across the same hardwood floors where his mother once learned to walk. The walls that witnessed so much pain now echo with his laughter. I still miss Thomas every day, but I've found peace in knowing he would be proud of how I fought for our family when it mattered most. I've learned that resilience isn't about never falling, but about how you rise again and who you help up alongside you. If you're facing your own challenges with family boundaries, remember that love and generosity should never require sacrificing your basic dignity and rights. Standing up for yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary, even when it's difficult, even when it's your own family. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice between peace and justice in your family? Share your experience in the comments below, and if this story helped you in any way, please subscribe to hear more lessons from this long life of mine. Thank you for listening, and remember, it's never too late to reclaim your power with just one call.